Welcome to the Jamesburg Presbyterian Church. Today is Tuesday, October the 12th, 2021. Today we're taking a look at the Gospel according to John in chapter 11, starting at verse 17. This is the miracle story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Miracle stories are often met with a lot of skepticism. They were met with the story was met with a great deal of skepticism since its inception, since John wrote the Gospel. But oftentimes we, especially in our culture today, look for rational reasons to explain away what happened. It's hard for us to grasp the fact that God can do whatever God chooses to do, even setting aside the conventional laws of nature. So when we're talking about a story about death and the raising of Lazarus from the dead, we often want to try to find another solution for the story besides mystery, divine mystery. What we want to say is maybe Lazarus was not really dead. Just as in the resurrection of Jesus, we want to say that Jesus wasn't really dead, that he had been beaten, he had been crucified, and that his time in the tomb allowed him to gather his senses again, regather his strength, do a little healing, and then come out of the tomb. That in itself would have been a miracle given what he went through. But in today's story, we try to look for rational explanations for why Lazarus is alive, or we just say that the story is made up. But let's assume that the story is 100% true for today's purposes. It is a turning point in the Gospel according to John. It's the sixth miracle. If you've been counting as we've been going along, this is the sixth miracle, and each time the miracles have become bigger and better. And the raising of Lazarus from the dead is a bigger and better miracle than any of the others before. In verse 17, we see that Jesus arrives in Bethany. This is where Lazarus and Mary and Martha live. We're not really told if there are any spouses involved. We're not told if there are any children involved. They are not relevant to the story. We could assume that maybe there was a bigger family than just these three. It's not unusual that families lived together in a family compound. Lazarus has died. We're told that's made clear. And when Martha hears that Jesus is coming into Bethany, she runs out to meet him. She says to him that if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It sounds like a complaint, and it is. In Judaism, in this time period, a complaint is not a bad thing. She is expressing a complaint, but it's with faith. She couples that with, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. So she's pointing out what has happened. She is complaining that her complaint expresses her belief that Jesus could have done something about it. And then she follows that with, even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. They have a conversation. Jesus uses the ego eimi, again, I am, and he follows that with the resurrection and the life. The people back in these days believed that there was a resurrection from the dead. They believed that it would be at the last day. And this comes mainly from the book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2. In that particular passage, there is an expression or a hope of a life after this life. So that belief traces all the way back to that book, Daniel. The Pharisees believed in a resurrection, and the Pharisees were the more popular part of Judaism in this time period. The Sadducees did not believe in resurrection. They believed that what you see is what you get, and that's it. So Martha expresses her belief in the long-standing tradition that resurrection comes at some future date. What Jesus is saying when he says, I am the resurrection, is that resurrection is a possibility in the present tense, not in the future tense. That resurrection and a person's belief go hand in hand. How that actually plays out, John does not explain except to say that we are already participating in that final day in the present. So it's not just a future eschatological event, it's a present day event. He also says that he's the life. Resurrection and life cannot be separated. So these two things are made explicit in how Jesus responds. He asks her if she believes, and she says, I believe that you are the Christ, that is the anointed one, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Mary is called out of the house, and we're allowed to believe that none of this is happening in the family compound, that actually Martha has gone to maybe the edge of Bethany or several doors down. They're not right there in the backyard. So when she goes to get Mary, the people that are there have come to the conclusion that she is going to go to the grave to grieve, and they are there to be those witnesses to the grief and participants in the grief. This was part of the Jewish culture back in those days. So they go with her. Now, we're told in the very beginning that something about the geography, that this is in Bethany, which alerts us to the fact that they are just across a ravine from Jerusalem. So when we're told that there are Jews there grieving with Mary and Martha, we can assume that some of these people, at least, have come from Jerusalem. There may very well be people in the midst from Bethany, but they are also being associated with that group of people who do not believe, who have come from Jerusalem. So, and we're going to see that disbelief in this story. Martha comes. She, in some versions, it says she knelt at Jesus' feet. Actually, the Hebrew word is better translated, she fell at Jesus' feet. It's almost as if she's doing a tackle on Jesus. Her running falls right before Jesus, and she also expresses that same my brother would not have died. The complaint is a form of faith, expression of faith, that they believe that Jesus could have done something to prevent this death. We are told then, when verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Now, that translation, deeply moved in spirit and troubled, that translation is a deliberate cleaning up of the Hebrew so that we are not disturbed by what is really there. What is really there is literally not he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. He was agitated, he was angry, he was furious, he was deeply disturbed by all of this. Those are the words that are there. And they get translated in a cleaned up version because we don't want to imagine Jesus with what we would consider to be negative emotions. So we lay it out as he was just moved. He was moved in spirit. What does that mean exactly? He's troubled. Oh my goodness, I'm disturbed. But the true Hebrew there, the literal translation is he was furious, he was angry, he was agitated. Now, what would he be agitated about? What would he be furious about? What would he be angry about? Because that is the translation. There are a couple possibilities. The first is that he's angry at what death has done to his friend Lazarus. That's a perfectly acceptable explanation. The second possibility is he is angry at the disbelief he sees in these people who have come here, including Martha and Mary. He's angry with their disbelief. If you had been here, something would have happened, but not now, it's too late. Or he's angry about the power of sin over the world, or he is angry about his realization that he is going to be facing death himself. He's going to be facing the Satan in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's going to be facing these people who are witnessing this miracle and yet not believe after the fact, he's going to be facing their accusations because this story results in a decision to kill Jesus. So all of those are possibilities. Maybe all of them are intended by John. It's for us to discern which is the likely explanation for this anger, for this agitation. But the verbs are very clear in what they mean. And it's just that we cannot handle Jesus having an emotion. And there's that two-word verse, verse 35. Jesus wept. It moves on to Jesus says, we're going to take away the stone. And Martha says, no, 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 no. There's going to be a bad odor. Now, the typical Jewish practice was to put the body in a kind of cave, in a mausoleum. The cave was usually, the flooring was dug so that there was like a lip, so the body would almost be placed in essentially what would be like a lip, a pan. And this would be to keep the fluids inside and not leak out of the tomb. The stone door was rolled in place. There would have been flowers, there would have been incense, spices. All these are to try to minimize the smell of decomposition. This would only last for a few days. Eventually, the odor of the decomposition would be such that it would be unmistakable. So rolling the tomb door away would result in a harsh odor of decomposition. And this is, again, a detail to note. 4 days is a long time to be in a tomb. So if Lazarus had been sick and just kind of passed out or something, fainted, they buried him, now he could come out, and he was never dead in the first place. Well, 4 days in a tomb without food, without any air, fresh air, without any water would kind of kill you too. So this detail is intended to alert us to the fact that there's no way Lazarus could be alive at this point. So Mary confirms the death. And Jesus' response is, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? John's gospel, one of the major themes in the gospel has to do with belief. Do we believe that God is capable of intervening in the conventions of life? Do we believe that God can overrule the natural laws? In this case, bring back to life somebody who is decomposing. And that's another thing. It's not just that Lazarus' body is freshly put in there and could be reanimated. At this point in time, there is confirmation of decomposition. So it's not just that Jesus is raising Lazarus from the dead. He's having to restore the body from decomposition to alive again. Jesus prays, and there has been a question about that prayer. What is the intent of that prayer? Is Jesus asking God's intervention at this point in time? And the answer is no. Jesus is so confident of what is happening that the prayer is actually a prayer of thanksgiving. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. This is a prayer of affirmation of faith. It's a prayer of thanksgiving. Jesus doesn't need to ask God for a miracle. Jesus already believes that miracle is going to happen. And so Jesus calls Lazarus to come out of the grave, and what happens is Lazarus comes out of the grave wearing the linen that would have been wrapped around him, so that the flesh could be contained, and the spices could be contained next to the skin. Jesus even has to tell them, take the grave clothes off of him. So back in these days, bodies were put in a tomb. They would have been left there for approximately a year. At that point in time, the soft tissues would have disintegrated, and what would be left are the bones. And those bones were then put in an ossuary, and then the ossuary, which would be kind of like the size of a shoe box or a boot box, would be placed back into a grave. And then the place of decomposition would be used for other bodies. So in Egypt, there was some embalming that was done, especially if you had the money to do it. Otherwise, burials were pretty much the same thing. You would bury the body and wait for it to decompose so that later on in time, the bones could be gathered up and put in an ossuary. A few years back, they found an ossuary that had writing on it that indicated that the box belonged to James, the brother of Jesus. And that ossuary was confirmed to be real through carbon dating. So was it the literal brother of Jesus? Was this the Jesus that we're talking about from the gospel? Is this the figurative brother of Jesus? We're not really sure. It's just we know what we know. The story ends with here that Jesus is asking that the grave clothes are removed. The second part of the story is the result of this miracle story. And the result is the Jews have come together. These are some of the people that had been there to see the miracle. You would think that they, at this point, would come to be believers. But many of them are really disturbed. And they go to the chief priest and the Pharisees and call a meeting. And the meeting is with the Sanhedrin. They're the ruling class. The Pharisees would have been members of this because they are also scribes. And the scribes and the Sanhedrin meet together. And they raise this whole question, what are we doing here? This guy keeps doing miraculous signs, and if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. This is not really an expression of concern for the downfall of the nation. It couldn't be any worse than it already is. They're an occupied nation now. So what are they really complaining about? What they're complaining about is their power. Fear that they will lose their power, their status, their position in that culture. This is about retaining power. Power-hungry people wanting to make sure that they continue to be in power. That's nothing new. It goes on every generation, every culture, every nation. There's always people worrying about their own role, their own status. Caiaphas, and we're told that Caiaphas was the high priest that year. And some people say, okay, this just goes to indicate that Jesus or that John doesn't know what he's talking about, because once you're elected high priest, you are high priest forever. Yes and no. You're high priest as long as the Romans let you be high priest. As a matter of fact, Caiaphas will be removed from office when Pilate steps out of his position. So the role of high priest is only as good as whoever is in charge of Jerusalem is willing to let you be that place. So John knows exactly what he's talking about. And even though it's a Jewish appointment for life, from a Roman perspective, it's a yearly annual appointment, and you are allowed to be the high priest as long as they will let you. So this is not a mistake on John's part. It is absolute reality. And what Caiaphas says is, you know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. Again, this is about protecting and preserving their own power. The Romans are not going to destroy the whole nation over Jesus. They will destroy it later on in time over a revolt, but not over Jesus. So, but what Caiaphas says is it has a number of profound implications. The first is that there's a sense in which when Jesus dies, he dies for all of the people. And if you have faith in that death and resurrection, you become saved So there is that level of understanding to what Pilate says, or what Caiaphas says. But there's also this sense, if they really truly believe that their power is at stake, then by killing off Jesus, their power is preserved. The only way to preserve their vision of the future, their own selfishness, is to kill the guy who seems to be threatening it. Maybe they're concerned too about the possibility that they will be overthrown by the Jesus followers. At this point in time, there are a number of people that are not satisfied with Jewish leadership coming out of the so-called temple cult. There are other small groups like the Essenes who are starting to gather up a large following. And if the Essenes gathered up with the Jesus followers, this could be possibly a threat to the Sadducees and the high priest, that temple cult. Right now, they're the ones that tell everybody what to do. They're the ones that are getting the wealth from the religious ritual. They're the ones that are making money on the sacrifices. They're the ones that are making a lot of money and have a lot of power over the people. They're the ones that are in charge of Judaism. What if they get replaced? So this is not about the whole nation succumbing because people are following Jesus. It's really about their own power. The Caiaphas priesthood does get replaced, and it's around 36 Common Era. So that is what ultimately happens. We're told in chapter 1, verse 12, that the children of God are defined as those who receive Jesus and believe in his name. At chapter 8, verse 28, Jesus told the Jews that at his death, they would realize that I am, ego eimi. Both of these ideas are brought together in verse 52, when John identifies the purpose of Jesus' death as the gathering of God's dispersed children into one. Jesus' death will be the dividing line between those who believe in his name, recognizing God in him, and hence show themselves as children of God, and those who do not. So we end today's installment at chapter 11, verse 54. Next week, we're going to pick up at verse 55 and go through chapter 12. 11, verse 55 actually should be part of chapter 12 because it introduces what happens in chapter 12. So I'm not in entire agreement with the way the book is numbered, but the committee that numbered it a billion years ago didn't ask me for my opinion, so it is what it is. But I would definitely put verses 11 through the end of chapter 11 with chapter 12. It's the introduction. So this chapter that we just finished, chapter 11, becomes the turning point. It's the middle of the book, literally, but it's also the turning point where a decision has been made about what to do about Jesus, and that decision is to kill him. And now we're going to see that the efforts are in that direction. Tomorrow I will have a devotional. I hope you'll tune in. It'll be the 80th devotional. Please let me know whether or not the devotionals are helpful, trying to decide where we're going to go from number 80. Is that the end, or do we continue, or what happens next? We will continue with the Gospel according to John. Someone recently suggested maybe following John up with the book of Romans. I'm giving that some consideration. I think that would be an interesting book. It's a theologically heavy book to consider, but it would be an interesting book nonetheless. Thank you all for tuning in today. Stay safe, stay well. I will see you soon.